Hey, Seattle hockey fans. It is officially the offseason for the Seattle Kraken. The team will travel and have exit interviews, and we will have all of that. But today we're talking Firebirds and a little bit about the Kansas City Mavericks. That's what's coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network. My name, Erica L. Ayala, here, been your host from the very beginning of Locked On Kraken. Live here in Tulsa, where your Kansas City Mavericks are taking on the Oilers. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Also a contributor to CBS Sports. I talked a little bit on yesterday's episode about what I've been doing with CBS regarding women's basketball the last handful of days. But we are back and we are excited. Want to let you know today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. You got to admit, some of us have a competitive side. And if you are a fan of Monopoly, if you have a competitive side, then you're going to love Monopoly Go. The mobile hit is a twist on classic Monopoly. You can join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. The Seattle Kraken officially out of contention. We knew that for a while. We heard from Matty Beniers, a very direct Matty Beniers wanting to kind of get the interview over, get back to Seattle, and get this offseason going. We also heard yesterday from Joey Decord that the negatives are pretty clear about not making the postseason. That's what you play for. But the positives are just as clear, especially for someone like him who hasn't had a long offseason in a while, looking to recover, rejuvenate. And I think that's exactly what a lot of the members of the Seattle Kraken have to do. It's been a long slog of a season. And, they're just looking to, I don't know, get back on their feet, so to speak. So we'll see what happens there. But I'm excited because we have the Kansas City Mavericks playing right now, and we also will have the Coachella Valley Firebirds playing very soon. I mentioned yesterday, and I got it was actually not game 1 that Kansas City played. It was actually game 2, but the Mavericks are in the are in lead of the series. It has been 2 back and forth games with the Tulsa Drillers, or excuse me, the Drillers is our baseball team here in Tulsa. The Tulsa Oilers, but the Seattle Kraken have been holding their own, and I think we expect them to win, but I also want to see them practice good habits. And I'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about, we're expecting to be able to catch up with Tad O'Had after today's game. And then again, before Monday's game, they are going to play Monday's game regardless. So, we're going to talk about a few of those things. But right now on the episode, I actually want to take you to a familiar voice. And you know him, you love him, because he is the voice not only of the Locked On Ducks podcast, but he's also the voice of your very own Coachella Valley Firebirds. That, of course, is the one and only Jason JD Hernandez. And he's going to really set the scene for us on how the Firebirds got to where they are. And that is with a first round bye. And you want to talk about getting rest. You want to talk about putting yourself in a position to make a longer run. I think that this rest could really be great for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. They'll get some of their players back. That they also will be able to definitely have Evans back. We know they got Shane Wright back. And so I'm curious to see what the coaching staff does with that rest. And JD also talks about the supporting staff, Dan Bilesma and his coaching staff, what makes them successful. We've spoken to Dan on the podcast. We've spoken and talked a lot about Jessica Campbell on the podcast. So I want you to hear from someone who sees that work live in living color. He also talked about the most recent winning streak being snapped and maybe something that goes into retirement, at least for now, while the streak is over. So I'm so grateful that in our Locked On family, we have an expert and someone that can help us talk about the offseason for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. And again, that is the one and only JD Hernandez. So we're going to talk about that coming up. I do want to just kind of put this Seattle Kraken season, though, into perspective. Is it a failure? We had this conversation, I've been asking that question, and I do think we have to be honest. There is a part of this that seems like mission fail, not accomplished, and the Seattle Kraken are really going to have to figure that out. We see that the headline from the other day for the Seattle Times, Seattle Kraken finish off disappointing season on a high, winning 4-3 in Minnesota. And so I like what, again, Joey Decord said. And he's talking about that you want to learn from this, is what Jeff Baker is writing, and that it's something that starts from day one in training camp. And I have mentioned this before. I didn't like the training camp for the Seattle Kraken in that I don't think it pushed the team physically enough to get us physically fit and sound. And, that's a tough thing to do with such a short training camp. It was certainly in the goaltending position, a competitive training camp, but I think there has to be a little bit more of a plan for the Seattle Kraken at training camp, because I think the Kansas City Mavericks seem to have a plan. The Firebirds seem to have a plan, and maybe the Seattle Kraken, I don't know if they tap into fully a development plan, and maybe they do, because it just we seemed disjointed out of the gate in a different way than season one, but familiar enough. And that's tough. I think what's also tough is this has really nothing to do with the Seattle Kraken on the ice, but there are also reports that the team and Jeff Baker has been following this article for a while, but what's going to happen with Root Sports and thus kind of the broadcast team? I think if you lose JT and Allison Lucan and Piper Shaw, then you're doing it wrong. Nick is also great. I've talked about my feelings on Eddie and John. I mean, is fantastic. So I really think there's room for that crew overall. I have noticed a few things here and there, which, and I've kind of alluded to them here and there, but I really hope we find a good landing spot when it comes to the broadcast, because really, if I'm being super nitpicky, Eddie is just not my cup of tea when it comes to how he interacts, especially with John. But I understand it, and it's very familiar to a lot of hockey fans, so I totally get it. But we'll see what happens there. The big question, though, is, and we've talked about this before, Dave. Are we going to see Dave when it comes to next season? And that's an interesting question that we're going to tackle a little bit more. But like I said, I really want this to be about the development team. I really want this to be setting you up to know how to cover or to follow, because I will be covering the Kansas City Mavericks and also the Coachella Valley Firebirds once they get started. But coming up next on Locked On Kraken, let's hear from JD, and then I'll get you ready for tonight's game against the Kansas City Mavericks. That is what's coming up on today's episode of Locked on Kraken. But again, whether it's the disappointing season, we talked about that yesterday, whether it's Dave Haxtell, the roster as constructed, and even now the broadcast, lots of questions. We've got at least 4 episodes, 4 weeks even. I could spend, 1 week just filling episodes on those topics. And those are the 4 things that we're going to talk about. And we're going to get into that over the offseason. But again, coming up next on Locked on Kraken, we are going to talk about the Coachella Valley Firebirds, because it's a Firebirds Friday. And then, of course, I'll get you ready for the Kansas City Mavericks game tonight. Today's episode of Locked on Kraken brought to you by our friends at Policy Genius. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. You can talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the process step by step as you are looking for insurance in the marketplace. It helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help you talk through it. Your work-life insurance policy may not offer protection that your family needs, so Policy Genius will give you unbiased advice from licensed experts and a support team. And thousands of 5-star reviews, on Google and Trustpilot from customers prove that they are found to be the best fit for their needs. So check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL or click the link in the description to get a free life insurance quote and see how much you could save. Remember, that's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. And thanks as always for making Locked on Kraken a part of your daily destination. A reminder, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you your favorite teams every single day. I was just on Locked on NHL. We talked about the return of the PWHL. We talked about Layla Edwards, not just becoming the first Black woman to represent the United States at Women's Worlds, but she is an MVP of the tournament. And then also talking about the PWHL might have to figure out what to do with the New York team. Between reports of players kind of coaching and picking their own line mates, I've told you before that I have a lot of questions about whether the coaching and even general manager, front office staff has the credentials to be able to truly assess the talent on that team. Something's got to give. And there's an interesting New York Times article. We actually didn't talk about this on the show because we recorded it before the article was out, but there's an interesting New York Times article that hits on that. And so I'm planning to have a show on Saturday and on Sunday. So maybe we'll get into that a little bit more. Anyway, those are some PWHL updates. So check out Locked on NHL for those updates. But as promised, I want to take you to the one and only, you know him, you love him, Jason JD Hernandez, giving you a rundown about the Coachella Valley Firebirds.
What's up, you Kraken fans? Jason JD Hernandez, normally the host of Locked on Anaheim Ducks, but I'm also the public address announcer for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. Or check that, the Pacific Division champion Coachella Valley Firebirds. That's right, on Wednesday night, the Firebirds clinched the best record in the Pacific Division and therefore have earned a first round bye. But wait, hold on, because hey, what do you say? The Firebirds have also clinched the best record in the Western Conference, meaning that they will have home ice advantage all through the Western Conference final. So they've clinched that. Congratulations to the Firebirds on having the best record in the West as far as the regular season is concerned. And this is a testament to the players buying in and coming back and running it back. Also a testament to the coaching staff that have all done a great job. Zuli, the goaltending coach, done a great job. Stu Bickle, Jess Campbell, the assistants have done a tremendous job. And of course, stick taps to Dan Bilesma, having the entire team buy into what they are doing for the season as the Firebirds try to attain their ultimate goal by winning the Calder Cup and avenging what happened last season. So just to catch up, the Firebirds did clinch the best record in the West thanks to them having the most points and thanks to a combination of wins and Milwaukee not quite winning all their games. But hey, you know what? The Firebirds will take it. And, you know, we got to give props to all the veterans that have been a steady force for the Firebirds all season. You know, Cole Lind has been tremendous all year long. El Capitan, the captain, Max McCormick, leading the team in goals and will wind up having the single season record for most goals in a season. Now, granted, it's only been 2 years, but Max McCormick does have that record. And also, we've got the return of 3 players from the Kraken just this weekend. Ryan Winterton has come back. Logan Morrison has come back. And of course, Shane Wright is now back with the Firebirds, and he'll be back for the rest of the season. He'll be back for the entire postseason since the Kraken are now out of it. And the Firebirds are ready to reload, and it's a matter of who they're going to play. We don't know. 2 through 7 is so close in the standings that we probably won't know for at least a couple weeks. It'll be a while. Seeds 2 through 7 are going to fight it out and advance to round 2. And the Firebirds go straight through to round 2. But just talking about the last few games in general, the Firebirds' home winning streak did finally end in overtime against the Bakersfield Condors on Friday night. So they had won like a ton of games in a row at home, and that streak was bound to end, folks. I mean, the red jacket now goes away, but yes, for those of you that are Firebirds fans, yes, I was wearing the same red jacket throughout the entire winning streak. But you know what? I'm a little stitious, at least a little stitious. But once again, congrats to the Firebirds on a terrific regular season. And Kraken fans have got to be excited about this because we saw this happen last season. Ty Cartier, he had a big playoff for the Firebirds last season. Joey Decord obviously had a great playoff for the Firebirds last season. And you cannot replicate how important it is to have this experience. It's paramount for these young players to see the kind of atmosphere that you can get in a playoff environment. And especially the run that the Firebirds had last season, all the attention, you know, the series going the distance to Tucson, going the distance to Colorado, that intense going the distance series against Calgary last season, going 6 against Milwaukee, going the absolute distance against the Hershey Bears last season. And you gain that kind of playoff experience in that environment, it is nothing but good. And you've seen the confidence grow in Joey Decord. You've seen the confidence grow in Ty Cartier. You've seen the confidence grow in Riker Evans. And by the way, Riker Evans is expected to be back with the Firebirds at the end of the regular season. The Kraken season does end middle of next week. And I would expect Riker Evans to be back in Coachella Valley for the final 2 regular season games for the Firebirds. I think it's 20th and 21st, both against San Diego. And then it's assumed that Riker Evans will be around for the entire playoff run. So a lot to look forward to if you're a Kraken fan for the future, but a lot to look forward to if you're a Kraken fan that's following the Firebirds. If you haven't already, check them out on AHL TV. And also, I expect that we might get some games in the latter rounds on Root Sports once again. So, you know, Kraken fans up in Seattle, check out the Firebirds on Root Sports. Hey, even if you're up in Seattle right now, come on down. You know, the flight isn't that bad. Take the flight down from Seattle to Palm Springs Airport. Take in a couple of Firebirds playoff games. You'll hear my dulcet tones on the microphone as the fans cheer on their Coachella Valley Firebirds. So that's a wrap on this update. Once again, thanks for checking it out. And don't forget, you can check me out on Locked On Anaheim Ducks, wherever you get your podcasts. My Twitter's @StimpyJD, and I'll be posting some Firebirds content all throughout the rest of the regular season and all throughout the playoffs. We'll send it back to Erica L. Ayala from Locked On Kraken. And Erica, hope to see you down here for the playoffs as well. Take it away.
Thank you, JD. You got a pretty comprehensive update there, and you heard Riker Evans perhaps in play to come back for the postseason. So I talked about 4 things in the first segment that we are going to focus on when it comes to the Seattle Kraken. You best believe that there are 2 other things that we're going to talk about. One is the Coachella Valley Firebirds, and the other is the Kansas City Mavericks, who already started their playoff push. But I want to wrap this up for Firebirds Friday. JD is absolutely right. They play the Gulls this weekend. And so those are the 2 regular season games. Once we get through the weekend, to JD's point, hopefully we'll have a better picture. But there's a whole AHL playoff primer that's available that dropped today. And either way, the Coachella Valley Firebirds are set to play the team with the lowest seed in the first round, between the Wranglers, the Reign, the Bakersville Condors, the Colorado Eagles, and the Abbotsford Canucks. You also heard JD run through that we went the distance almost in every single series. It was not an easy path for the Coachella Valley Firebirds in the Calder Cup last year, but that experience you heard JD talk about is critical, and perhaps is what helped Ty Cartier and Joey Decord be successful at the highest level. So we'll see what our Firebirds can do, but you best believe we will have all of the action here. But coming up next on Locked On Kraken, let's talk about the Mavericks. And I mentioned yesterday that yesterday's game was game 1, and I misspoke. They've already played 2 games in the series. Tonight is game 3, actually here in Tulsa. I have a conflict, so I won't be at the game, at least as of right now, but am set to speak to Tad O'Had between tonight's game and sometime before the next game. So we will keep you posted. We've already been in touch with the Kansas City Mavericks. They can't wait for us to have postseason coverage, and we'll be very accommodating. So I'm looking forward to that. And so let's talk a little bit about the Mavericks coming up on Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken also brought to you by our new partner at Monopoly Go. I mentioned there are a lot of competitive people out there in the world, myself included. And so, it's okay to have a competitive side. And it's even better to use that competitive edge in Monopoly Go. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. A great twist on Monopoly, where you play not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. The best part is, of course, messing around with your friends. You can charge them rent on iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly, but you can also heist their vaults and gain their riches for yourself. And the leaderboard will show you who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just the competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and take a more collaborative approach with people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. We aren't going to talk too much about the Seattle Kraken, at least as far as games, because there are no more. They won their last home game, and now it's a long off season. We will be the guys golfing or doing whatever in the off season. So I talked about yesterday, a lot of bittersweet. We have a lot of things to talk about. I mentioned them in the first segment. What's going on with Dave? How do we learn from this disappointing season? What can we do in the off season and in training camp to get better? And what's going to happen with Root Sports? So those are the 4 main topics. Things will generally fall into those buckets as we talk about the Seattle Kraken in the offseason. But again, I have plenty of hockey to talk about. And today we're talking about the Kansas City Mavericks. They have a 2-0 lead right now over the Tulsa Oilers, who play just behind me here in downtown Tulsa. I talked about it yesterday. I talked about it a little bit at the top of the show, but this is a Tulsa team that we've played well, but also that has played well against us. We've played in a clustered succession, almost like you might see in a postseason, a few times this year. And the first time was pretty dominant for the Kansas City Mavericks. The second time, the Tulsa Oilers learned a thing or two. And so it's really about balance. And when I say balance, I mean the Kansas City Mavericks, they can be very good defensively. The Kansas City Mavericks can also be amazing offensively. Goaltending is pretty solid. I talked about Jack LaFontaine the other day. So there's a lot that has made this team successful. And now it comes down to them being able to execute on a consistent basis. And again, that's just not what we saw from the Seattle Kraken. And even there were times last year, which I think is why a lot of the series went the distance, 6-7 games in the Calder Cup playoffs for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, because we would get an edge and then kind of drop off instead of staying at an intense pace. I do think that of all of our three teams in the pipeline, the Mavericks do that the least. That's from my eye test. That's not even looking at stats. That's from my eye test. I've seen Seattle play. I've seen Coachella Valley play. And I've seen Kansas City play here live. The latter two live. I haven't seen Coachella Valley live yet. But as you saw, I have an open invitation from JD. So we're going to have to do that. But so a game tonight, or excuse me. Yes, a game tonight. 7:05 Central, so that's 5:05 Pacific time. And it's again a 2-0 lead. You can watch the game live on the ECL has the games available on Flow Hockey. You can also listen to the game. And if you head over to the Kansas City Mavericks website, they have a link for how to listen to the game. But, we're expecting the Kansas City Mavericks, to do pretty good. We're expecting for them to win this series. And it's just a matter of execution. So the playoff roster, I mentioned some of the players that have been doing pretty well. Patrick Curry, Kale Burchard. We mentioned, of course, Jack LaFontaine. The other goaltender is going to be Cale Morris there. The Mountain Division semifinals, again, against the Drillers, started on Wednesday. We got that win. Continued Thursday. And I talked about that yesterday. Friday here in Tulsa, and also Monday here in Tulsa. And then game 5 is on Thursday, if necessary. Game 6 on Friday, both Thursday, Friday in Kansas, if necessary. Game 7 on Sunday in Kansas City, if necessary. And so it's going to be, the playoff roster is 24 players, 20 player active roster, 4 reserve players. And so I'll talk a little bit more with Tad O'Had in the next handful of days about what he's liking from this team, what he's getting from goaltending. I really am curious to hear what he's getting from goaltending and what he expects, just knowing that this is a team that hopes to make a deep run. And we also know that at the top of this week, actually, and I didn't mention this yesterday, but the affiliations from the Seattle Kraken to the Coachella Valley Firebirds and the Kansas City Mavericks have been renewed. We could not be more excited to extend our affiliation with the Seattle Kraken and Coachella Valley Firebirds for 2 more seasons. Lamar Hunt Jr., who's the owner of the Mavericks, said, "As we continue to grow this relationship, the stability at all 3 levels of this affiliation makes this one one of the best relationships in the ECHL. And if you're an everydayer and an OGer, you've heard Tad talk about that. I've asked players that, including the most recently, I believe was Ty Cartier for the Winter Classic. So I think this is going to be really exciting. I've talked a lot about Jack LaFontaine. We've had Tucker Robertson on the podcast, as well as Max Andreev. Ryan Jones is another player I'm hoping we can talk to during this playoff run. So there's a lot. We're going to get into all of it right here on Locked On Kraken. So as always, thank you so much for listening. I look forward to catching you on the next show. And in the meantime, take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We hold fast. We stay true. We get fired up. And I guess I got to figure out what the call is for the Kansas City Mavericks. I'm going to ask Tad that actually when I speak to him later today. Whatever that is, do that as well. And I will catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.